that help take us into the future, but perhaps in a way that is a little more or a little different to what you might have expected. So I'm not going to try and prejudge or say any more. Our guest speaker this morning, ladies and gentlemen, is Claude Lewenz. Many of you, most of you, I suspect, will have never met him, don't know him, but many of you actually will have read or followed his previous identity, if I use that word, called Ella Forrest. Some of you are aware of the Ella Forrest story. Well, it's the Ella Forrest petition that was on on a website called change.org that drove the 9,000 signatures I talked about. So Ella Forrest is actually Claude Lewenz. Claude Lewenz began what he calls his second career in 1980 at one of the world's first application software companies north of Seattle, just at the same time as a young Bill Gates was trying to sell IBM an operating system. So Claude's background in IT and software and so on goes right back to that early time, the very early 1980s. Claude was the third non-family hire at a startup IT company that automated tractor dealerships across the US, replacing index cards with mini computers, early 1980s. Armed with a history degree and no technical experience, Claude was part of a generation that built the software industry from scratch using first principles thinking. And that's the mindset that he brings to what he does today and to his thoughts around New Zealand's collectible vehicles. Claude's passion for cars started when he was young. He learned to drive at 8, bought and rebuilt a wrecked 1956 Chrysler at 12, and at 16, the first sports car that he drove, I don't think he owned it, but he drove it, was a Shelby Cobra. And that was probably a 64 or 65, a very early Cobra at Rhode Island, Newport, Rhode Island. The biggest car that got away from him that he still regrets, turning down a $300 offer for a 1952 Seata 208S, now $1 million car. He could have bought it for $300, he didn't. He still regrets it. In addition to cars and motorbikes, he's held a pilot's license. He's built his own home. I've not been there, but I know of it, and it's, I think, bigger than a home on Waiheke Island. It's the largest earth brick compound in New Zealand, and he made all of the 330,000 bricks that went into that house and home. He's the author of 3 books on building. He's married to an internationally known artist, and within that house on Waiheke, they have their own art gallery. Father and grandfather. Back to cars, his collection over the years has included an Alfa Romeo Spider 69, 1750, a Mercedes G-Wagon 1980, 1963 early build Buick Riviera, several other Alfas and Detroit Iron in his barn. He then shifted his focus to British right-hand drive collectibles, especially Bristols. I understand he was actually the largest Bristol owner in the world. What was it, 8?
Not the largest in the world, but I had too many.
You had too many, okay. He served as the North American Registrar for Bristol Owners Club and a member of the Madison Avenue Sports Car Society that then launched the first granite Concours d'Elegance, which featured his 55 Bristol drophead. After gaining residency to New Zealand in 1995, he actually moved to the country in 97, bringing with him a couple of Alfas, the Bristol drophead, and some other cars, Bristols and the Mercedes. I won't go into the detail of all of those. He might touch on those at the same time. But somewhere in that time, early on into New Zealand, early 2000s, he came head-to-head with the New Zealand compliance rules, particularly involving the Bristol 411 and the 69 Alpha. And again, I won't go into the detail, but the words that I've got from Claude as part of his intro: after spending thousands with no end in sight, Claude gave up, sold the Bristol 411 at a loss, and mothballed the Alpha. In early 2023, just before Ella Forrest went public, staring at the Alpha he had not driven in 25 years, He checked if sanity had returned in terms of the compliance and certification process. It hadn't. And in his view, in fact, it had got worse. Hence, he formed the petition under the pseudonym of Ella Forest, which, as I say, today has 9,000 signatures to it. I won't go into that in more detail. He might touch on that. But out of the Ella Forest initiative, I established contact with Ella Forest, not knowing who Ella Forest was, where it would take me, whoever she was, but it took me to a meeting in Auckland with Claude. And out of that, we've kept in touch. He's not a member of the Federation. He's not a member of any particular club, any club at all. But he's a great thinker. He believes that the future of what we all collectively are part of, historic classic cars and all the industry around it, deserves some extra and special thinking because of the world changes that are going on around us. And I won't try and touch on that. He's going to talk about that. And I've got to tell you, he's opened my eyes and got me thinking in a way I never thought I would. I'm saying that personally. I've talked a little bit about that with the Federation executive, but he's now going to share his thinking with all of us. Claude Lewenz, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. First of all, can I just speak? Can you hear me like this, or do I need the microphone? Okay, great, because I'm not very good with mics. I suppose I should explain the Ella Forest bit. My great-grandmother is Ella Forest, and I don't do social media, but at one point I needed to sign up for Facebook for something years ago, and so I just used her name so I wouldn't, have a presence. When you do a change.org petition, they want you to have been on Facebook for 6 months. So I took my great-grandmother and said, I'm sure you know everything about collectible cars. I don't think they had cars when she was alive. I put this petition together and figured I'd get 200 signatures total. And the first day we got over 1,000. And it's now up to over 9,650 or something like that. And the petition itself came out of frustration. I think it was Jeff Tobin last night talked about he just wanted to drive a left-hand drive Mustang. That's all he wanted, But to do that, he had to turn everything upside down in government to get the permission. And he stuck with it. He was just another kind of annoyed guy who said, I'm not going to put up with this. I'm an annoyed guy. So I had, I think, 11 collectibles when we lived in Greenwich, Connecticut, and we had an old family summer house in Rhode Island. So between the two, and both of them they had big barns. And that's, of course, as you know, the most dangerous thing a collector can do is have too much space. So you keep getting vehicles until you run out of space or until your wife shoots you. I did learn, however, very early on, I dated her in a 1963 Buick Riviera, made in the first year, in the first week of production, and it was the most amazing boat. I mean, you only could go straight. If you turned, it was like the QE2, it would tip. It got, I think, 3 miles to a gallon or something like that. But she thought it was very classy, and she thought I was kind of cute. And then when we got married, I realized that if the secret to success of a marriage is always have your wife in a third car that is a convertible and it's a sports car and she thinks it's sexy. So the first was an MGB, the second was a 79 Alpha Spider, and then finally we brought that here and we sold it years later. I got her a SLK and now she's into her second SLK. The collectibles that I did there tended to be quite a variety. I mean, a G-Wagon, American Cadillacs, Alphas, quite a range. But the thing that in those days, I remember buying a Bristol from a guy in Virginia. Actually, I should back up a little bit. When we knew we were coming to New Zealand, you're only allowed to bring 2 left-hand drive cars in, one for you and one for your wife. So that meant I had to find right-hand drive cars, and having owned an MGB, I knew that unless you're in love with leaks and constant repairs and always 2 things that don't work on it, English cars are going to be a problem. And then I discovered Bristols. And Bristols are actually better than the German BMW they started with. So they, I don't know if you know the story, or if you even know what a Bristol is. There is one at Auto Restorations, by the way, and it's a real bargain. You should definitely buy it. After World War II, the Bristol Aircraft Company saw that it was going to go out of business, and all the contracts were drying up. So they went over to Germany, and they went to the Nuremberg trials, and they said to the corporate executives who were currently under arrest for the war, and said, look, you know, if you let us take your plans and take some of your machinery, we won't hang you. And these guys go, absolutely, gone. So they came back with, I think was it a BMW 323 or something like that, and they made the Bristol 400, but they were made by aircraft engineers, and therefore they were made better than the German. So they're extraordinary cars. They're definitely form follows function, and most important, they're right-hand drive. But the Bristol Owners Club, I joined it, and they only had 50 in the United States total on the registry. And then I kept saying, hey, I actually found one. There's 51, 52, 53. And by 54, they sent me this beautiful, you know how the English do things, this beautiful plaque appointing me the North American Registrar for the Bristol Owners Club. So at the time, I was in the computer business, and I traveled a lot for work. And so I would look up wherever I was going who had a Bristol, and I would go a little early, take a picture, and I would ask the 2 most dangerous questions. Have you bought it recently, or is it for sale, and if so, what price? And of course, the guy would say, well, yeah, I bought it 25 years ago, but I really am getting old, and I'll take $7,000 for this $20,000 Bristol. So of course I would buy it. And I would bring them home. I wouldn't tell my wife till they showed up in the driveway. I ended up, I think, with more left-hand drive Bristols than anyone in the world, because like with the 410, there are only 3 of them that are left-hand, and I had 1. And so the collection, the important thing about the collection was how easy it was. In Rhode Island, you go in, you give a bill of sale. There's no such thing as a title for a car over 10 years old. You simply say, I want to buy it, I want the registration. They give you the plates for like $25. No warrants, no inspections, none of these sorts of things. And of course, you then go with the insurance that is absolutely next to nothing because they're collectible cars. So having 10 or 11 is not a problem. Down here, as you know, if you want to have 10 cars registered and warranted, and they're 20th century cars, every 18 days you're taking 1 down for warrant. And you're spending about $3,000 just for the documentation. In any case, when we made the move here, I packed up the containers and I brought the 2 left-hand drive cars I was allowed, which were both Alpha Spiders, and I brought 3 Bristols, and I'd actually sold the 2 G-Wagons I had because they were left-hand drive, but one guy called me, and one of them had been rolled, and I was selling it for junk, but I put a $7,000 price on it US, and it sold instantly. And the third guy who called, I said, why is everybody wanting this? And they said, it has a title. And you can't bring in a vehicle from overseas if it's under 25 years old, or you have to crash test 2 of them so you can register the third. So the third guy who called me, by that time I said, sorry, it's gone. And he said, well, look, I've got a right-hand drive one that's stuck in the Port of Baltimore. They won't allow me to bring it in. Do you want to buy it? And I said, no, I'm moving to New Zealand. And he said, come on, make me an offer. Now, mind you, I just sold the good one for like $25,000. So I said, well, you know, I'll take $1,200, give you $1,200, expecting to hear a click. No, I just bought a car sight unseen. So now there's a reason I'm telling all this. This is not just entertainment. So we shipped all these cars here. And then I, in total good faith, say, right, I want to now get them registered. The Bristol was absolutely no trouble. All I had to do was change the headlights and put the little brake light on, and they had a real problem with the fact it had aircraft seat belts on it, and they said, no, those aren't compliant, you have to get New Zealand ones. So it had a little parachute on it. It was quite cool. The Alpha, again, no problem at all. It went right through with the same sort of thing. Now the G-Wagon had been sitting on the port for 2 years, and therefore it had corrosion, salt water, that sort of thing. It had a cracked windscreen. The headlights were full of water. So I sent it off to restoration, but they did it relatively quickly. And of course, they put new undercoat on it. They painted the thing. It looked great. I took it through the inspection under the old rules. Not a problem. Drove it home. Again, didn't tell my wife till I showed up with it, but that's why I got it painted. She thought it was cool. Then the two really good cars, for those of you who know, the Alpha 1750 Spica fuel injection boat tail is considered the best of the 105 Spider series, and the Bristol 411 is considered the best of the Bristols. So both of those went for proper restoration. And also, New Zealand was known as the place where you could get a floor pan for a 105 because Alan Bowden up in Auckland had actually made the correct floor pans. You can't get them in the United States. There they just use flat steel. So this is the best place to bring an Alpha if you want to do a restoration. Both of them were in restoration. They were being worked on. And then the guy called up and said, okay, he just rebuilt the Chrysler engine in the Bristol. Everything was done. I had the guy who used to do leather upholstery for Lamborghini, did all of mine. Interestingly, I bought the leather off the Xena film set. So it was a very custom leather interior, quite cool. And he even took an Oriental rug and used the carpet. He said, real Oriental rugs are cheaper than Wilton carpet. So, and this was going to be a keeper. We sent it off, I think it was VTNZ or one of them, for it, and it failed miserably. It failed on BIRM 3-4, which basically says if there's any evidence of any repair, if it has undercoating on it, if it has been used acid wash, a few other things like that, it goes to a repair certifier specialist. I figured, okay, not a problem. Having been through this with the others, I just sent it off to somebody. The first thing he says is, well, you have to sandblast off the whole underneath of the car you have just spent $50,000 restoring. Okay, so I spend $1,000. I come, there's my beautiful leather interior full of sand grit. The engine is full of sand grit. It's a mess. Right, are we now done? No. Now we're going to start cutting holes in it, and we're going to start inspecting. And I go, this thing has just been rebuilt. I can show you the invoice. No, that's sorry, we have to do it. At that point, I said, what is this going to cost me? 10 grand. And I said, this is ridiculous. This is 10 grand to undo what I paid a lot of money to do. I said, forget it. I'm taking my marbles and I'm going home. Brought it, stuck it in the barn. It turned out there's a guy named Tim Edney who has one of the greatest car collections in New Zealand. He owns a stable at the Ellerslie Racecourse, and it's just full of amazing vehicles. And he had bought my 409 because when you live on Waiheke, you actually don't need, a highway cruising car. And he made me an offer on the Bristol 411, which was about half of what I had into it, but it was like, right, take it away, done with it. So then I'm looking at the Alpha. And that's the car I enjoyed most. I used to race at Lime Rock. They say it's the most fun you can do with your clothes on, driving four-wheel drifts and leaving the Ferraris in the dust in the corners because an Alpha handles better. You get to the straightaway, all you see is their blue smoke. But so at that point, I went to the guy who had put the floors in, the sills, the guards, everything. I said, okay, what's this going to cost? $10,000. I said, forget it, I'm taking it home. I stuck it in the garage. So I then got on with my life. We built, as I was saying, a very large earth brick compound. We have market gardens. We have an art studio. We sponsor the Waiheke Chamber Music Festival. We're heavily involved in the community, and the car just sat there. And at one point, my wife made the observation, my hair had turned white, and we were starting to go to funerals where they didn't die too young. And she said, I want to know what's going to happen with this thing. And By the way, I should say, 2 years later, I came up with an answer, which is one of the things I'm going to talk about today, which is I said, if I die and you don't know what to do with this, call Gary and not only donate it, but donate the workshop to the Federation. So that'll be one of the funding things we talk about. Because believe me, she would not put it on Trade Me. She says, I can't deal with this. I said, right, call Gary, get rid of it. He'll take it. I mean, it's worth $40,000, $50,000. So I left it, and then in 2023, I called, again, another specialist repair, not a certifier, but a restoration guy, and I said, what's it going to cost? He said, it's $15,000. I'd hoped by now sanity had returned, because, you know, this in the beginning of new rules, they sort of work out the bugs. At that point, I'm just offended by the idea of spending $15,000. So I said, right, I'm going to start a petition. And that's when I found out I couldn't start a petition because I don't do social media, so my great-grandmother started the petition. We initially directed it to the Minister of Regulation because we thought this is the kind of thing that David Seymour would like to get his teeth into. Unfortunately, when I presented it to the minister's the manager of his whole operation, they're non-responsive. I'm going, look, guy, I got over 9,000 voters here, you know, and I am allowed, this is the thing about change.org and things like that. You can send an email once a week to these people until you declare victory. So don't declare victory. 4 months before the election, you send out an email that says, you know how the minister got this through? Remember it. Now, I don't know if you know how this works, but there's a politician who gave me this. And every time I get on the ferry and ride for free, I remember that politician. Okay? And we are called special interest voters here. So our voting, I'm sure we have a wide range of political views, but if somebody does something dear to our heart, I really don't care about an awful lot of the stuff that goes on in politics, but this one's personal. It's my car. Okay? So the idea of involving the elected officials as opposed to going bottom up. Now, I'll divert a little with a different story to show how this works. We have an affordable housing crisis problem on Waiheke Island. And so they came to me because I've written a book about building communities and I have expertise in this area. And they came to two of us at the same time. One guy said, we're going to work with the system. Absolute disaster. They took them forever. It cost double the amount. And then the council came along and said, oh, you have to pay a development contribution. The whole thing collapsed and they kicked all their affordable housing people out. I took a different tact, and that is I read the rules. And then I said, okay, let's set up an organization for what we found that mobile homes was an alternative that was not included under the law. Nevertheless, recently the council came along to somebody and said, oh no, you have a dwelling here. And instead of doing what you normally do, he contacted me. We contacted Wayne Walker, a local councilor. He went to the top, working down. And next thing we know, we're putting them on the defensive. And this is the key. If you work up the way Jeff did, it takes forever, right? If you work top down and you can play it right, things can happen faster. So with the whole thing with the inspections and the things that annoyed me, when this petition started, Gary reached out to me. We had a meeting. And then he had me come down here, and I met with George Kerr and Gary, and I learned a great deal. Now, while I have belonged to clubs actively in the United States, to belong to a club on Waiheke is complicated. It costs $200 just to take the ferry to go do something with your collectible. So I don't belong to a club, but I still have the huge passion with it. And when I looked at how it works here, I saw a huge potential, but it wasn't being fully implemented. So the Federation has been here 30 years. It has the shell that says we speak for all of the clubs. What it doesn't have is a budget. In fact, they wanted more to fix my alpha than the budget I just read here. So what does it need? Well, I'd say that the first thing it needs is what in my business we used to call key influencers. So a key influencer isn't quite a lobbyist where you think, you know, the sort of slick shoes and that sort of thing. A key influencer is the person who actually knows how it works. And if you want to see a successful one of that, go read the website of the Federation in the UK, because they had an insider, a key influencer, and when anything came up, they would call him and he said, "I'll talk to Clive." Now, Clive was either a minister or he was in the ministry or he was somewhere. And so they were able to get a lot of things done because they had that kind of inside thing. Now, if you look at, for example, the warrant of fitness, you'll see that for the first 3 years, you get a free holiday with a warrant. If the average of a new car is 45,000 kilometers in 3 years, that means you get to drive 3 years without a warrant at all. Now, why is it 3 years? Then it's 1 year. But then if it's an older vehicle, it's 6 months. And the answer to that is because when that was adopted, 2014, new car dealers want to sell a car. Typically, the customer keeps it 3 years. Then it comes up for the warrant. But this time, the tires are going to fail, the brakes are going to fail, the suspension's going to fail. And so instead of going into the showroom, into the service department, they walk into the showroom, they trade it in. And by doing the 3-year holiday, it has nothing to do with safety, it has everything to do with the vested interests of the members of the MTA. Now, the other thing to remember about the MTA, which I hadn't realized, is they own 40% of VTNZ. And the other 60% is owned by DEKRA, which is the multinational, started in Germany, equivalent of the MTA. Now, this is what's generally called a conflict of interest. But that's how it works. You employ lobbyists who go and persuade government officials, please make regulations this way. And we argued on health, safety, environment. In this case, we don't do equity, but we argued on these things, when in fact, if you look at it, you go, this is pretty obvious what it is. Why in 2014 would it be 6 months when it turned 14 years old? Because the used car dealers don't want to sell cars older than that because they still have the Consumer Guarantees Act, but they're not making as big margins. So they say, well, if we make those 6 months, that's going to encourage more people to buy newer vehicles than it is the old ones. And I have to say that's true. I don't look at anything on Trade Me that's older than 2000 right now for that reason. So when you look at that, you say, well, how did that happen? And the answer is because they employ, in their case, lobbyists, and they're very upfront about it. They say, this is what we do. And so they have the relationship with the government, and they're the ones who are then successful in getting through legislation that they want. Now, interestingly, the MTA did not oppose the collectible car part, the 40-year that has been put forward, because they say there really isn't a problem with collectibles. They're not unsafe. Well, of course, the reason they're not unsafe is, first of all, because we know our vehicles far better than anybody inspector does. We know them thoroughly. If I go to an inspector, he's not going to know that my Guibo has a problem because he's not going to know what a Guibo is. Are there any Alpha guys in here? I might be the only Alpha. Anyway, any rear-wheel drive Alpha has a Guibo problem, and every 20 years, if you don't replace it and you're on Lime Rock racetrack at 120 miles an hour, it will break, it will start flailing around. And I remember the guy jumping out and dancing on the car till it stopped as it destroyed his beautiful Alpha. That's something we would know to replace, but an inspector would not know, okay? We know our cars better. So what is missing in all of this? Well, you've got the Federation is here. It exists. It has, to use the New Zealand term, mana. It's well established. You also have 3 levels of car clubs. So there's one level of which I think the VCC and the Hot Rod group are about the only one that are huge, have facilities, have budgets, have been around forever, have clubhouses, we had a great dinner in one. The second level are probably what most of you are here, maybe the Mustang Club would be one of those. And then the third tier are the social ones. They're just, hey, a bunch of us, we live nearby, we'll form a little club. So if you look at these first tier, I've kind of learned that the hot rod people have taken care of themselves pretty well. So let's talk about the other side, which right now the VCC has. And what we're looking at there is that they have the Domus, and they have the Vic, and they have the clubhouses, and I think they have staff. Now, you all know what Domus and Vic is, or do I? Yeah? No, okay. So Domus basically has the potential to be the list that shows every single car, not car, motorcycles as well, military, every collectible. Apparently there are 997 different makes since 1900, okay? It's very hard to get that number, but it seems to be about 1,000. You would say on the list, any Alpha 105 or any Bristol at all is guaranteed to be a collectible. However, a 1984 Toyota Corolla is unlikely to be. It's probably just going to be an old and dangerous car, except for Nana's that has, 3,000 kilometers on it. Looks like it came straight out of the showroom. It's a collectible by Regio number, okay? So the first thing that we really need is to say, we have a list of collectibles, and these are all the ones in the country. Don't start it from scratch, just go talk to BCC, and can we say, can you be the keeper of that, working in conjunction with the Federation? And that then gives you a clear statement to the government, and we say, we need to have two definitions. Right now, what we have are what are called transportables. Most cars out there are transportables. They're used to go from point A to point B. They need warrant of fitness because their owners know nothing about them, don't know when the tires are bald or the brakes are unsafe. And what we say is define them and regulate them, and we don't want to talk about those. But I have a second group called collectibles. And the definition of transportable is all vehicles except collectibles. And collectible definition is all the ones listed on the enhanced VCC Domus list. So I recommend that, and that's something that the Federation should be working with. Now, if we do this, the first thing that the Federation needs to do is raise money. And I talked about one is the Widows Fund. I think there'd be quite a bit of response for that people say, I'd much rather donate it. What does that mean? You need a charitable trust. I have two, by the way, that I've kept going. We used one for a community issue we had, and Russell McVeigh set it up for free. I guarantee you'll find a charitable trust somewhere that is just in somebody's hip pocket. You don't have to go through the process of starting a whole new one, and then you just rename it and you take it on. As soon as you do that, when my wife donates the car, it becomes a tax-deductible donation, okay? So that should be, and I don't think you want to sell the car as your operating budget. You want to build a fund in which you then earn interest on that hires the staff. There are other things that can be done. I believe it's the Motoring Caravan Association has ferry passes and fuel passes and insurance and all these things. You basically say, you go to private groups and you say, we'd like to get a cut for recommending you, and it's all transparent, everybody knows it, but go buy your insurance from this company because they support us, okay? That creates cash flow. Another one, I was part of when the Bristol Owners Club did a grand tour of New Zealand, and everybody shipped their cars down, and then they drove around and they did, the grand tour. So what I'm seeing in that is it's done informally. Like I gather it was one of the motorcycle groups that brings them down and things like that. What the Federation should be doing is a little like Tourism New Zealand and saying, now you don't actually do the work, you contract it out, but you basically have the Grand Tour of New Zealand. And you go to every single car club in the world, because one of the things about New Zealand is, to quote my next door neighbor, John Hawksby, who did it for Waiheke, our bumper sticker, says, Waiheke, far enough behind to be ahead. New Zealand is far enough behind to be ahead. So, look at these roads we have. They were made for those classic cars parked out there. They're 2-lane. They wind, they don't cut through mountains. When you stop, it's not a McDonald's you're stopping at. It's some people who have run a garden center and they've got great food, and we really have a phenomenal setting for this. We had a house guest once who came down for 6 months, And all he wanted to do was see all the Lord of the Rings film sets. And he spent his whole time driving around doing that. It's in Scotland, they have the North Coast 500. And it basically is a road that you drive. And now they've institutionalized it to now you do that. There's a Kiwi company running a Route 66 trip from Chicago to Santa Monica. So we really should be looking at that as something the Federation sponsors and makes money on to pay that key influencer, the secretary. Keep it small, you don't need a big organization. And either you go to the VCC and say, would you give us your Wellington office, for staffing, or you find somebody near the Beehive and said, I know you're a classic car nut. It's amazing. The woman who sold me breakfast, as soon as she saw it, she starts going on about her dad and her classic car, his classic car. They're everywhere. I mean, even David Seymour has a Lotus 7 replica that he built. So get that office, get it funded. The next thing is, you apparently have 200,000 people on that report. We once had a battle, that was why we set up the Charitable Trust on Waiheke, where we were taking on the Fay Rich White partners who wanted to put a development in our ferry car park, and it's like, where do we park? So we organized 1/3 of the island, but the membership was a gold coin that you don't have to pay that gives you lifetime membership, okay? Because all we wanted was their email addresses. When you run a membership, like for example, the VCC, you gotta pay 100 something a year, and so people pay sort of, and then they don't pay. No, what you want is a membership where it is $0, all you want is their email address. Now, I'm an American, so of course I not only learned to drive when I was 8, I learned to shoot when I was 8, and I was sent to the National Rifle Association Safe Gun Handling, which was held at the Armory. And of course we all loved it because, we got free ammunition and got to shoot, and we learned how to shoot squirrels without killing our neighbors. If you look at what they do, they have the most powerful mailing list in the United States, and while they're not in any way a majority, they terrify the electorate, the Congress. Anything they oppose, they get flooded with emails, and you can't not get anti-gun legislation through, even though, once a week we're shooting up another school. We need to look at the model without judging the value of firearms. We need to look at it from this point of view and say, how do we get 200,000 email addresses, and we promise them we won't flood you with them. We're only going to send you something when we really need action, and we will have a website that says this is what we need to do. We're going to point you to it, because of those 13,000 submissions, I suspect quite a few of them were my 9,600 signatures, because I used it to say, hey guys, this is coming up. Here's the link. Here's a web page I just set up for you so you know how to do it. If you want to copy this, you can, but I'd really strongly recommend you state you're in support and then give a personal story. So the guy who had an MGB and he said, I would take it for a warrant, and the guy insisted it failed because it only had 2 seats. What do you do? But these are the stories. Now, when that gets to the minister, he looks at that and goes, yeah, we got a problem here. The next goal should be, how do we increase 200,000 to 300,000? How do we get new collectors in? Now, the first thing you have to recognize with collectors is we all started, I'm making a presumption here, as kids drawing cars in the class on our notebook. Then we got posters, okay? Emma Peel, James Bond. It depends on your age. Fast and Furious. And then we hit 30. Finally, we have enough money that we go out and buy our first 63 Buick Riviera, or whatever it is that we buy. And we hit our collectors pretty much 40 to 70, and then we get to that age where, geez, maybe it's time to start moving it on. Well, the first thing we have to do is make sure there's somebody to move it on to. So how do we do that? Well, if the Federation is sponsoring with the clubs and saying, we want club days at high schools. And now remember, if you want to walk into a high school, you have to pitch it right. So how do you pitch it? You pitch it with, say, we want to run defensive driving courses to teach your kids how to drive. And they did that in my high school when I was 15. And what they taught me to do was unbelievably cool, because it was a supermarket parking lot on a Sunday, and they got there, they got the fire department out, they hosed the whole thing down, and then they would let one tire out, almost all the air, and have us drive this thing, and then they had to turn it. And of course, the thing went crazy, and you learned about skids. They actually taught me the police maneuver of when you lose it, you get to 90 degrees, lean over the back, put the car in reverse, keep the skid going, and get back control going down the road at 30 miles an hour. And I used that in a snowstorm where I would have taken out a woman in her car, and instead she watched this car drive past her backwards with me leaning over. Do that with cool cars. Remember our friend Clarkson and the cool wall. It's got to be cars where they go, this is cool. So I took my grandson in the SLK the other day. He's 5 years old. I put him in his car seat, put the roof down, and he said, this is really cool. His exact words. I guarantee you, I have just addicted a car collector 30 years from now. Hopefully he gets my Alpha. So these are all ideas to build the membership, accepting, like for example, Jaguar's making a big mistake. I have a Jaguar XJ6, and so I know Jags a lot. And I'm saying, you guys are nuts. People don't buy Jaguars until they've made it. You know, why do you want to appeal to a 25-year-old with a Jag? You appeal to a 50-year-old. That's when they've gotten to the point. So we have to recognize the demographics. Now, Haggerty did a survey in England recently and discovered that there are more millennials who either own or want to own a collectible than there are baby boomers and Gen whatever it is, the older generations. Read that study. It's well worth reading. So we can bring in the young. We don't have to bring in all of them. But it's going to take, there's only two groups that can do it, I think, and that's the Federation and the Vintage Car Club, and they have to work side by side, really, to do that. What should we be asking the minister for? Now, the first thing is, if you go to the minister, and hopefully, I didn't think I was going to fill up so much time, but I'm going to ask a former minister to give a little conversation about that. When you go to a minister and say, hey, I don't want to pay $15,000 to have my Alpha torn apart and rebuilt or approved, certified, he's going, so, I'm a busy man, go away. What if you say to the minister this? We are about to face the largest crisis since the Industrial Revolution. Now, 2 days ago, I bought my first robot. It comes from China, and it is designed to mow lifestyle block land, Kikuyu going up like this. My John Deere was flat tire, hoses giving out. It's 25 years old. And I was looking at buying another one. It's pretty expensive. And my wife said, have a look at these. So it's got a 30-day return on it. So I said, okay, I'll give it a try. It's unbelievable. You just sit there. We have a young fellow living with us, and so he knows how to run drones. I had him program the thing. It was cutting like an Oxford University lawn, those beautiful stripes. And I looked at that and said, every lawn mowing service on Waiheke is going to be out of business within 5 or 6 years. Don't go into it. I also had a doctor's appointment where a cardiologist was sticking little things onto me to make sure I would stay alive. And I looked at that and said, you're going to be out of business in 5 years. You're going to be out of a career in 5 years because a robot's going to stick these things on me. And it's going to read it with far more intelligence and far faster, and it's going to do it for next to nothing in terms of cost. Except our money is going to China because they committed to robots 10 years ago. AI, when I wrote my submission, my daughter said, run it through ChatGPT. I did, and it was scary how it wrote such a better thing than I had written. Writers are going to be struggling. Advertising executives are going to be struggling. Doctors, lawyers, accountants. We have to tell the elected officials, this is not science fiction, guys. This is now. This is coming. And it took 100 years to go from a Model T to a Tesla. It's going to take 10 or less to have that jump now. And what's going to happen is we're going to have a lot of people unemployed and unemployable, disemployed in this country unless we create microeconomies. Now, what's a microeconomy? The America's Cup is the microeconomy. So there's a lot of money that goes into it, but there's no way the sailors are ever going to be robots because if they did, what's the point? Plus, what they do is so specialized, it's not mass production. It's not like making BYD cars, you know, which you just come, but they're all robot made now. I've been involved in doing business in China, and we do not understand how far ahead they are. It is scary, and we are not going to catch up. So one of these microeconomies is called the collectible car, not industry, but economy. An industry makes profit. Ours, we spend money. Is there anyone in this room that makes money selling collectibles? One guy. Now, any accountant will tell you, therefore, this is the same as gambling, this is the same as drugs, this is the same as alcohol, except it is, and it's basically, these are human desires, but these are desires that are acceptable. Dealing drugs is not acceptable, but people love it because of the high you get. With what we do, it's cool. So how do we take this $16 billion economy and make it a $30 billion economy? Well, the first thing is, before the 2002 rule, I was actually looking at setting up a business where people would buy vehicles overseas and send them down here. And in fact, it was Bruce Pigeon with Auto Restorations who I was talking to. They're still here. It's phenomenal what they've done since then. And we should be doing that. How many of you went to the tour yesterday? Did you see what he was doing there? He was doing stuff nobody else in the world knows how to do. He had that French engine where he's sitting there telling us stuff, and I'm going, this is gold. This stuff needs to be documented, and New Zealand needs to become the collectible car repository of the planet. Now, to do that, we need the government, where we say, look, what Kiwis are really good at, Brian Flagg went over to England, found a Bristol 406 Zagato. There's 6 in the world. This one had been wrecked, and apparently it had a tree growing out of it. He bought it for next to nothing, shipped it down here. His father-in-law rebuilt the thing. Finally, now he's getting too old, because that was 1969. He sent it back up, and they sold it for, I don't know, it was 200,000 pounds or something like that. So that he contributed to the balance of trade, because Kiwis go overseas, buy these things cheap, and then we fix them up, and then the world says, yes, thank you, I'll take that. We should be supporting that. And we need to convince the government about a microeconomy, not about woofs. Yes, we should do woofs, but woofs should be the detail, not the reason we're convincing them. Because when they see that the wall that New Zealand is about to hit is severe, and it is going to be severe. Farming, we're going to have kiwi fruit picked by humanoid robots. They've already made them. It's just a question of when is it cheaper than hiring Samoan workers. Now, the problem with Samoan workers, you have to provide housing for them. And that's getting, I talked about the mobile home issue. I'm very aware of the other problems. You do not provide housing for robots because they work 24/7. You go into the new robotic factories in China and there are no lights on, and yet they're producing. It's scary to see. So we need to be talking with them about that. Now, we also need to understand how government works. There are 4 things they do in government: permission, regulation, taxation, and punishment. So, government loves regulation, but it turns out that permission is the most powerful tool in government. And it is because of human desire. Desire is a neutral word, but desire is what drives everything. Everybody in this room desires collectible vehicles. They don't need them. They desire them. They want them. And how do we channel that so that it's positive? Well, you have to convince the government that they need to do this in a way that is positive. The first thing we would do is we would say, we would like you to set up a 9th business group within NZTA. We want you to define transportable and collectible separately. And then once you've defined them, we want a very small group. There's a few things. We don't want you to bloat the business group. We want you to work with the Federation and the VCC. We want to require, when Jeff, I think it was Jeff last night, who talked about the guy opposing left-hand drive admitted he didn't have a driver license. He didn't know how to drive. What are you doing talking to me? He says, well, it's unsafe when you overtake. How do you know? You've never driven a car. So we would say, there have to be people who understand collectibles. in the agency, in the agency. And then and the other thing is then, like MB had a Minister of Business, whatever it's called, had a guy named John Gardner, and he made determinations. And he was really, really good because he never changed. Then he retired and they started putting these young people in who didn't understand anything and made horrible decisions. We know that about government. You go in to get something done, it's a new face every time. So we would ask that the 9th Business Group have a small group of people and that they're stable. And we think that's something that can be put in. We then have something called edge case policy. Does that mean anything to everybody? Maybe not. Edge case policy basically says we're going to do road to zero. There are 3.6 million cars on the road and 528 of them have crashed. That is 0.15%. That's an edge case. Then they say, well, actually, only 4% of those involved vehicle faults. That's 21 vehicles out of 3.6. But yet we're making policy, edge case policy. So you say, before we set up these things, set up the rules. And edge case policy is not allowed. You basically have to have a real problem. And you have to prove it. We don't have to do freedom of information. You need to prove it. I think that's probably enough of a talk. So what I'd like to do now, I sort of primed Harry to say that he's been in this business, and hopefully he had some really good stuff to say over breakfast. I will, though, finish with one thing before I do that. One idea I am proposing, but it is controversial, is the gold plate. Now, a gold plate is when you have a collectible vehicle, you get a special plate with a CV, or it's the fleet plate, which basically says you have your group of 10 vehicles, but you're only going to drive one at a time. It's like a dealer plate, except they all have to be warranted. They have to be road legal, and you can only use them on your own, and if you use them on anybody else's car and get caught, or motorcycle and get caught, you lose the privilege. It's not a right. And that we introduced that. Now, George Kerr had some concerns about that, which is basically regulatory creep. We have a good idea, but then as government goes on, they take over.
All I can say is, wow, what a brain dump of amazing ideas, many of which have huge potential. Let me start right at the end with the collector plate. Brilliant idea. It's been suggested before. I know it's been suggested before because I have suggested it before. But the regulatory creep is always the problem. Officials can always find 20 ways of saying that won't work because, and especially if the minister themselves has had an idea. Right? Some of you will have seen an ancient television program called Sir Humphrey. Yes, Minister. Yes, Minister. Sir Humphrey was the official. I have been in the position of telling one of my Sir Humphreys, you will go away and you will come back with a report which tells me how this might be possible rather than 20 reasons how it cannot be possible. That's a complete new mindset. And I want to say that during the 5 years or so that we've been working on the warrant of fitness issue, that the NZTA people especially have been amazingly helpful. They've actually helped us by prompting us in different ways on issues that we hadn't thought of, or with data that made it possible for us to find out things that we could never have found out without having that little prompt about that data existing, because if you don't know it exists, how can you access it and make use of it? Claude, you made a number of really good suggestions, particularly in regard to working with ministers, and I would say the first thing not to do with a minister is to go blasting in with, you're a damned idiot because you haven't done this. and you would be amazed how many people's letters to ministers about whatever it is they're proposing begin with, "Can't you fools see?" or words like that. If you're going to see a minister, what ministers are hoping for is that you bring a problem and that you suggest a solution with that problem. Because if you come with a solution, even if the solution itself may have issues, at least you've thought through some of those issues, and the minister can see that you're not just there to beat him around the head with a baseball, him or her around the head with a baseball bat, but you've actually come along with a thought process which says, here is this issue, there needs to be some way of resolving this issue, and perhaps a really good example of Malcolm might be the military vehicle issue. There are a whole bunch of historic military vehicles that their tear weight is right on the limit for warrant fitness, or just over the limit for warrants of fitness. Now, some of you will know the camper van story of years ago, when the weights of camper vans was a problem in terms of WAF or cough. That was changed. License, your ability to drive a vehicle in a certain way on your license. I was amazed yesterday, and I used to be the minister and knew all the stuff backwards, to find that it was possible, I think I'm right, Chris Dolu, in saying that you can drive Chris D, that you can drive a 17-seater van on a Class 1 licence, an ordinary car licence. I didn't know that before. I thought the limit was 12, but no, 17. Now, that's regulatory creep, where someone has had the good sense to say, hey, they're making vans of this size. The solution to the problem is simply to expand the amount that can be done on a normal car licence. Going back to the military vehicles for a moment, I think it's 3,500 kilos, and many of them, their tear weight is just over that, so they've got to have a cough. Well, when you turn up with a vintage military vehicle, or a historic military vehicle, might be 1940s or something, at a cough station, they go, oh God, go away, you're going to take, well, one, they're four-wheel drive often, two, they have controls, you know, the throttle pedal might be in the middle, and their whole operations is very different, their driving, etc., is very different to a modern truck. And the testing station guys are full up with commercial operators going, I don't want that damn thing in front of me, it's going to take 4 hours to get through, just get him out of here. And so they just say, we don't want to touch that thing, take it somewhere else. And that's the sort of thing that we've got to provide a solution for. And one of the solutions might be to say, if a vehicle, historic military vehicle, is doing less than, I don't know, 2,000 k's a year, you say to the minister, if it's below 4 tonne, it has a WAF, it gets its WAF once a year, and it's got a maximum of 2,000 k's a year, or 1,000 k's a year, whatever it is. That might be a solution to an issue. So if you're going to see a minister or going to put something to NZTA on an issue, always think through a number of options of solutions that might be possible within the system. When we first raised with Julianne Genta the 12-month warrants, my executive at the time were horrified that we'd invited Julianne Genta to be our guest speaker at the conference. One of the executives who's looking at me now made some particularly obnoxious comments about the Green Party, etc. But she was the Associate Minister of Transport. She had good ideas. None of us knew that she was, in fact, from a family that had classic cars in the States when she was a kid. We didn't know that at all until she turned up, as I said last night. But what we were able to do in engaging with her was build a relationship. You build that relationship, you then take the discussion into areas where they might not have thought to go, and you start developing the ideas. Now, with the officials, when you're doing that, if the official has their idea, or thinks it's their idea, it's likely to grow legs. Right? Some of you will remember the noise testing debacle of the 2000s. They brought in, we had a whole lot of trouble with boy races, which was like, how many of you were a boy racer when you were young? Had a mark on Zephyr with a straight pipe or whatever? I didn't have a Zephyr, but I had plenty of hot lead-ups. Right? Be honest. Come on, put your hands up. Right? Are they a problem? Of course they're a problem. They're a damn nuisance. I've got 10 of them live near me. They drive me insane. But they're the car enthusiasts of the future. And we have to husband for want of a better word, guide them. But when you're making regulation, you've got to have regulation which they see as relevant and sensible. If you're too restrictive, they just rebel, as we've seen in this city big time. So I think, Claude, you've given us a number of really, really good challenges. I particularly like the idea of expanding out to increase our professionalism, if you like, by having employees, or lobbyist isn't the right term. I sort of like the idea of maybe a facilitator who helps develop those relationships. It would be an excellent job for me 10 years ago, but I'm sort of, you need someone younger now, I reckon. You have given us the challenge of finding ways of developing more revenue. And I love the tour idea. Roy Hughes and I talked about doing it in the reverse years ago, of us taking tours of New Zealanders to Europe. But your ideas are damn sight better for New Zealand. Bringing those tours here and giving them all the opportunities to see the treasures that we have, and the outfits like Auto Restorations, Revival, Taranaki, etc., that are doing wonderful jobs around the country. And we've got a whole lot of other things we could show them. We've got the people building biplanes. We've got the people doing all sorts of wonderful things with theatre, with film, etc. We've got a whole country full of interesting things for most people worldwide. We should look at that idea really seriously. I hope I've helped in a way.
You have.
Don't go away, Claude. Can I just, over and above what Harry said, I guess trying to run the show as well, getting ready. We've got a few minutes, like 3 or 4 minutes, to actually take a couple of other comments or that people would like to make, or questions that they might want to throw to Claude. So Malcolm, and then Jeff, and anyone else. I can get about 3, I think, in.
Just a comment on Harry, on the military vehicles. My proposal was, because they're so risk averse, we proposed that the military vehicles be only allowed to be operated unless, and that improved the safety out of all sides. So that's one. The Military Vehicle Club is actually running tours of New Zealand. They have a contra arrangement with a group in America, and they go and do the coast-to-coast thing over here, and on 2 occasions in recent years, they've had a group of Americans come over here, and they've driven around New Zealand in military vehicles. So it is happening, and I really think there's a huge opening, and thank you for that.
Great, thank you, Malcolm. Over to Jeff. Can you just do it without the mic?
Yes.
I know it's coming over. But if you could,
Yeah, it's a small room.
just, if you can, a brief question. Yeah, or, yeah.
You should look fantastic. So, look, I agree, from your top-down approach, that's absolutely right, and we did put pressure on ministers and so forth, but we also built the groundswell from going up, because with getting a large group of enthusiasts, the ministers could see that in his votes, and guess who's in the middle? It's the NZTA who actually write the policy, and I called that a pincer movement, and I put pressure on them. In terms of the definition of collectible, I can give you a gift. We've already got that in special interest vehicles. One of the 4 criteria was that the vehicle's been written about as being collectible or of historic value in a number of magazines, and that could possibly be expanded, but it's already accepted in law. The only other thing I can think of, and it's you know, a problem's only a problem till you find a solution, and you're the man to find the solution, I have no doubt about that, is security of info. I mean, when we were out at the auto restorations, we weren't allowed to take photos for argument's sake of registrations because it's privacy. So my question would be, and I'm in risk management and insurance, so we go plan for the worst but expect the best, would be how do we keep that information secure from getting into the wrong hands in IT with, you know, everything like AI and hackers and things like that. That's the only comments I have. Fantastic speech, and anything I can do to help, let me know.
Thank you, Jeff. Any other comment? Okay, I'm going to say on our collective behalf, thanks to Claude.
My pleasure.
You've opened our eyes, I think. A great presentation which covered not only a lot of detail that came out of the whole warrant of fitness, and which is still an ongoing issue, but the point I guess want to emphasise for all of us, and particularly from a federation viewpoint, Claude, you have opened my eyes, and hopefully everyone in the room, and we need to share this message, that the world around us is changing faster than we realise. And when you start getting into the whole mechanics of where AI is taking society and our economies, we need to be aware of it and start thinking about it now. Because right now, unless you know you've got guaranteed buyers for the investment you've already got in collectible vehicles, and that investment, the buyers you've got already lined up are secure and are going to pay you what you want. If you haven't got that in place, who knows where society is going? So you've opened our eyes to the whole thing of how things are changing. So everybody, a round of applause for Claude. Before we break for lunch, and again, as part of our supporters and moving into a more, picking up on Claude's words, a more business-orientated approach in many of the things we do, I just want to pay special note of 3 particular sponsors or partners that we are working with. And in a couple of cases, we're now already involved with them, but all 3 of them have put money, on the table to help support us on this AGM weekend. The first of them, who I'm going to invite to come up and say a few words, is Carwatch. Rory, the microphone is yours. Like to say a few words for us? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a tough act to follow, to be sure. But thank you so much, Gary, and thank you all of you for having me here. I represent Carwatch. I just wanted to say this weekend has really made me realize vehicles are an important part of our heritage as New Zealanders. They're part of our history and our culture. Unlike many other countries around the world, we haven't had the access to an easy consumer economy where we can just be supplied with new cars all the time. And so we've had to work to protect and innovate on what we already have. What I've realized this weekend is that the Federation of Motor Clubs doesn't just represent an association or an advocate group for motor vehicles or drivers, but rather it's a reservoir of wisdom and knowledge and a safeguard for the essential culture and values of our country. At CarTrack, we have a very different heritage. So we started out of South Africa in the early 2000s to combat the rampant vehicle theft that's present there. Crime rates are rising in New Zealand and worldwide, and it's more important now than ever to protect our assets, like our classic cars, or in some cases our liabilities. I'm incredibly proud to be partnered with the Federation of Motoring, and I can tell you that 1/3 of all of the proceeds for our ongoing costs for Carwatch go directly to sponsoring and funding and supporting this organization and its initiatives. We use 2 GPS trackers in the same vehicle, meaning that we have an additional layer of protection. We have 20 years of experience in the most dangerous environments worldwide for vehicle theft, and that goes into our installations. And on top of that, we provide an early warning in the event of theft. So with that, I can say with absolute confidence that we offer the best solution for GPS vehicle security available in New Zealand, but not just New Zealand, but worldwide. So I just want to say, don't take your vehicles for granted. Protect your cars, protect our heritage, and protect our future. We're so happy to be a sponsor of the Federation, and thank you for your time today.
And Rory, we certainly appreciate your support and the ongoing relationship and look forward to working even closer together. Great. And while I'm just talking our sponsors, Rothbury Insurance is, Michael, I'm right, have put money in, invested into our weekend this time round.
They put $1,000.
They've put $1,000 in to help support us. Rothbury's are already in place as a partner to the Federation in terms of insurance programs for clubs. I think there's about 22 or something clubs that are already using Rothbury. We are working as a federation through Michael and as an executive, we talked about it in the workshop yesterday, to expand that relationship. We haven't done the final signatures and whatever yet, but watch for that information, because we're working even closer with Rothbury's to support us all. And the third sponsor I just want to refer to all is a company called Cumulo9. Who's heard of Cumulo9? Not a few, not very many. Cumulo9. Chris, please stand up. Give us a couple of words about Cumulo9. I'm putting you on the spot, but I think they should hear about it. Chris Hogg, ladies and gentlemen, Ferrari Owners Club, member now of the executive of the Federation, but Cumulo9 is a close associate of his, and they are also one of our supporters. Thank you.
Thank you. So, switch up if I turn it on. Anyway, so we're the total opposite of what you guys do, or what I like to do in my spare time. We're digital communication specialists. Easiest way to describe it, if you get a bill via email for your power or Sky TV or something like that, there's probably an 80% chance that we've sent it to you. And no, I can't turn them off, I'm sorry. Anyway, we felt that we could help the Federation with all of those communication tools, so things like campaign email, all that sort of stuff, and we're very happy to do that. For the last 8 years, we've been one of Leon Lawson's key sponsors. Since he made his way into Formula One, that's now become prohibitive. I don't know if you look at his helmet, you'll see Subaru here and here. Well, that little space cost $1.5 million US with a 3-year commitment. It wasn't for us, so we decided we'd sponsor the FoMC.
And as Secretary, I'd like to really appreciate Chris's enthusiasm and such like. He's got some innovative ideas about modernising the organisation, making it run more cost effectively, and you'll be seeing some changes coming through soon on a number of fronts. And Cumulo9 will be right in the thick of all that.
Thanks, Chris, and again, thanks, Chris. Lunch break now, everybody. We're right on schedule, 12 o'clock or just a couple of moments before. Let's take an hour for lunch. Be back in here, please, at 1 p.m. sharp, and we'll get into the rest of our AGM program. But please use this hour as you enjoy lunch or a little bit of discussion time after lunch to make yourself known, or pick the brain of Claude Lewenz sitting over here, because he's still got more stories and more experience and more ideas that will get you going. So make the most of the next hour. Thank you.